been a lot of people that have helped put this workshop together. SOX is pleased to host it, but the presenters and planners from Alabama A&M, Clemson, EPOC, ESnet, Indiana University, the University of Oklahoma, the University of South Alabama, and the University of South Carolina are all contributed to this workshop. And I am most grateful to them for their effort in putting together the content that we're going to present over the workshop today, and again in the workshop that is based on hands-on workshop that's the follow-on a week from today. And so I am very grateful to each of the presenters and everyone that has helped us plan the meeting moving forward. So this is how today is planned to go. I'm just going to kick it off for a few more minutes, and then I'll hand it off to Alex, who will be talking about the importance of cyber infrastructure. Then Harvey Neiman will take over for the technical approaches to working with researchers. George Robb is going to talk about data transfer nodes and how to move data across the cyber infrastructure that we've been putting together. Designing, building, and maintaining a data architecture, Jason Zarowski will be taking that one. And then Doug Stallworth has a persona introduction, and so that we can understand why it's important to measure the performance of our networks moving forward. If we haven't scheduled a break today, so if you need to take a break, you're free to get up and leave or join as you can. We are recording today's session, and we plan to post that, and so you'll be able to refer back to that if you missed something. You can always reach out to me or to Melanie if there's anything that could help make this experience better for you. I'm expecting teams to behave and work well for everybody. I think this will be a great workshop. Right now we have 70 people that have joined. There are 180 RSVPs. So, I do expect that number to increase as we go through the afternoon. And then hopefully everyone will have enough interest that they'll want to come back for the hands-on part of the workshop next week. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Alex and quit sharing my screen. I can figure out how to do that. There we go. Great. We see yours queued up, Alex. Thank you.
Awesome. And you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Cass. Make sure this is all right. Make sure you can see it. Present.
Yeah. Yep. Presentation mode looks great.
Awesome. So stop me. I am a professor and I can't stop talking. So tell me to shut up if I go long. I'll try to keep an eye on the time. But thanks for having me. This is fantastic. This is my favorite thing in life is doing biology, and I can't do biology without cyber infrastructure, the kind of biology that I do. And I try to do this actually in this talk a little bit about every biologist needs advanced cyber infrastructure to get the job done. Things have changed a lot in the last decade, and the change is even more rapid. So I'm a professor at Clemson University. I'm in genetics and biochemistry. I'm also part of the Center for Human Genetics and the Biomedical Data Science and Informatics program. There's a lot of really cool, like healthcare stuff that's going on at Clemson in human genetics. If anybody out there is looking for training in that, I recommend it. And I also have a company called Praxis AI, which I'll mention, which I'm trying to scale up my PhD training, like how to use cyber infrastructure and run genomic workflows through this company. And I also serve on the Internet 2 Board of Trustees as a researcher member. And I say that so I can, with the things I'm talking about today, I'm always trying to bring to the top of Internet 2, and also, with regional research and education networks as well, like trying to keep the researcher perspective engaged. And so to do the work that I do, I have to have multidisciplinary teams, and I didn't go to grad school and learn how to make a multidisciplinary team. They don't teach you that. But over time, I've gotten pretty good at finding, or just getting lucky, I guess, at finding the right people and assembling teams to do the science that I do. And this is now required to have these teams teams that do different things to move, store, and process data. And this is kind of my definition of cyber infrastructure here. Everything that it entails to be able to do that, to be able to process these data sets, because they've just gotten absolutely about. You went to the doctor and they measured your cholesterol and they put a number, an integer on a piece of paper and slid it in a manila folder and put it on the shelf. That was medical records then, and now you can get your genome sequenced, and that's gigabytes of data. That doesn't, I guess you could put a CD. Nobody has CD drives anymore in the envelope, but things are now online in the cloud, and that trend is not going to stop. So the point I'm trying to make is the biology is about research, but also the healthcare and doing anything with any biological data in the private sector. What we really do in my lab is we're biologists, and we're trying to understand things like tumor, brain biology in humans, but also some agricultural systems. But to do this, we're trying to identify genes that are different between different things like normal and tumor. And we engineer workflows to be able to do this. A lot of what we're doing right now is containerized workflows, because that's really the way to do science. And we're running things, with container managers and moving a lot of things to the cloud, to democratized and commercial clouds. My lab is about a third looking at animals, a third looking at plants, and a third doing cyber infrastructure, bioinformatics, software engineering type stuff. And again, my team of people, I have about 14 people in the lab right now, and then a huge list of extended collaborators. These are the disciplines that they're in, right? So I think this is kind of a first take-home message with this, is that you got to have different types of people to do this kind of work. And I if I were to sort this properly, maybe I should put this at the top. The IT is a person or a group is absolutely critical to my research to make it happen. And I'm constantly interacting with different levels in the IT organization at Clemson. Just because I can't see everybody, is everybody still live and everything? Can you hear me?
Yes, we're all here.
Just make sure. So that's after a year of teaching, right? To make sure that I'm not just talking to myself, which I do anyway. But this is I'm working. We're using artificial intelligence for precision medicine applications, and really what this means is being able to take an individual patient's data, like maybe their genome sequence, their DNA sequence from a tumor, and trying to find out what's broken in their tumor. So then you could devise therapies for that. This is another paper we have recently. We're looking at in roots in a little bean plant, a little legume plant called Medicago, trying to understand how they recruit bacteria from the soil, nitrogen from the air, and fix it, make their own fertilizer essentially inside the plant. And if we know how to do this, we can engineer this into other plants that don't do that normally, naturally, and reduce the amount of fertilizer needed for food production, because there's almost 8 billion people on the planet and rising. And there's another big thing that I do is just with my company Praxis is trying to do the scalable training. Where I'm using, data intensive workflows in my training, those kind of labs, and trying to do that where I can scale it out to, I'd like to try actually doing some high school level and trying to teach some data intensive computing in the high school level with Python and things like that. A big part of what we do in the lab is we make networks, not like data transfer, biological networks where nodes are, say, genes, and edges between nodes is how they're interacting. And so this is a picture of kidney cancer network that we've built. And ironically, or whatever, we use data transfer networks to move the data around to build these things, which I've confused people with networks. And what I'm talking about is biological networks in this case. And so this is one of the big projects we're doing right now. Is we're working with Bill Passman, who's a friend, a colleague, I guess. He had kidney cancer several years ago, and had the DNA and RNA sequence from his tumor and sharing with people to try to find therapies for him. And he's worked with like a lot of Silicon Valley data science type companies, and had hackathons that we've gone to help him analyze his data. And he's doing this for his own purposes, right, to try to find therapies for his tumor. There's a picture of it right there. But he's actually working with like other kidney cancer, so, other people with other types of illnesses, and centering hackathons around their data, trying to help them. And this is something that I think will become mainstream, in the next 20 years or so, where really that lab test that is like looking at your DNA process of medical process, and you can't do process data like I think Bill's with several gigabytes of data, his one data set alone, without advanced cyber infrastructure to be able to process it. So the work we've done for Bill to identify gene targets is at an academic research lab, and it's great for training because students love it when you actually have a face on what you're trying to do. But this is actually really important too for medical schools, and not medical, just medical for hospital systems and the healthcare industry, being able to deal with the data deluge that's happening right now. And there's a lot of people like Bill who don't have a lot of options, right? And they want to tap into the research tech that's out there now, especially a lot of the artificial intelligence stuff, to be able to find treatments for them. Some people are desperate, right? Their lives are at stake. So I don't know if you remember cutting, and I'm sure everybody on the call was in a biology lab at some point, and maybe you cut into a frog or something like that. But this is kind of a map of my biology lab. Now, this is workflows that we use in the lab to be able to process data. And we generate our own data ourselves or through collaborations, like where we actually touch things that are once alive, and I guess we kill them and see what's inside of them. But then we generate we also pull data from different repositories. So there's lots of databases out there. Like, I'll just pull out one, for example, the Cancer Genome Atlas has thousands and thousands of human tumors and data associated with those tumors, like gene expression patterns and stuff, that you can now pull. And thousands of papers have been published from this one database alone, understanding cancer, the disease of cancer. So we pull data from all these sources, run them through these workflows, and we use lots of different systems here to process our data. So like Google, there's a great distributed Kubernetes system called the Pacific Research Platform, which I'm more than happy to talk about. We're actually working with Cisco for at the CLIGHT REN, the South Carolina Research and Education Network. I guess similar to SOX, a little bit smaller. Where we have a Kubernetes system that we built into the data center on top of the network that I'm using for training in South Carolina, how to run genomic workflows on Kubernetes systems. But anyway, we use these systems, pull this data, run through these workflows. And a lot of what we do, everything's containerized when we can now. We also use our HPC system that doesn't always require containerized software, but we're trying to use Docker as much as possible, and we're using Nextflow Workflow Manager to manage a lot of our applications on Kubernetes systems. Is there any questions? I should stop there and see if there's any questions before we keep going. So seeing none or hearing none. So this is the data that we have is a lot of data, right? It's tremendous amounts of data. There's petabytes and petabytes of data that you can access now, and you can generate petabytes of data in a small lab now if you have some reasonable funding. And as DNA sequencers get cheaper, and they, we're almost on the cusp of DNA sequencers being surveillance devices for things like the epidemic, being able to sequence, the air going in the grocery store, right, and seeing if there's coronavirus floating around in any setting. So there's lots and lots of data that's happening because of DNA sequencing technology. But one thing is that all the data we have is organized by evolutionary relationships. So we're actually have a project where we can take data sets and assign them names, like the identifier for their evolutionary relationship, and then if it's a tumor, if it's human tumor, kidney, like all these different names, and we can assign those to data sets and be able to have a pull data based upon naming systems. So we've been doing a lot of work with Cisco and with the name-defined networking community, the NDN and ICN communities. Since I know this kind of a networking crowd is why I'm bringing this up. We're able to pull out of this data now, like genomes, like the human genome and the mouse genome and the Medicago bean plant genome, And a lot of the data sets that have been sequenced, like, Bill Passman's, kidney tumor data set, name it and pull it from these systems. So we actually have some test beds that we have across the country for publishing and pulling these data sets. And so we're, IP free, right? No IP addresses, just asking the network for the name. And this is a very, I think, a very natural thing or needed thing for the biology community, or even anybody touching biology stuff, and that includes the healthcare industry, for pulling these data sets based upon name instead of trying to figure out where on earth they are and what protocol to use and all that kind of stuff. So we've been doing a lot of this work with for this ICN and Indian systems, like trying to assign these the FAIR data principles: findability, accessibility, interoperability, reusability, for different formats of genomic data from different databases. Like we use a lot of stuff, data from NCBI, the National Center for Biotechnology Information, and there's sister organizations around the world that host data like NCBI does. We pull data from NASA Gene Lab. This is a UK/EU database ensemble. It's actually in the UK. We pull data from these triple databases. It's an open source database system we have that we use in the US. Anyway, we pull all this data from these different systems, and we're trying to have one layer, this name-defined content delivery layer for pulling data. And we've got everything piloted now, and we're trying to actually try to test out production of the system on Fabric, on the new Fabric system, if you're familiar with that. Which is a Fabric experimenter meeting going on today. So they just kind of turn on the lights, I guess, for Fabric. I have another project of a PI for a CC Star grant. I believe this is a CC Star project that's funding this workshop. And it's called CyDOS, and we have developed a lot of Kubernetes native applications. We built this app store that runs in Kubernetes, and we've run this in different systems like the Pacific Research Platform, Google, the Cisco Container Platform, like the box we have at Sealight. And this is a way for users to have Jupyter notebooks and Nextflow workflows and other services that they can sort of point their data to a lot of these things and try to make it not so much user friendly but accessible to people that understand some basic informatics type work. And these are all workflows we developed to do genomics, and we're doing a lot of work right now too for trying to understand our resource usage patterns when we run Nextflow workflows, to be able to do cost analyses for commercial cloud, so that I can write a grant and say, I need $2 million to do my work, and then not need $20 million, right? To be able to actually have an idea of what I need for my research in the commercial cloud. And so a big part of what we do is we do a lot of testing on democratized cloud systems, where we have somebody's paying the bills, but we have access to it, and being able to then learn how to do our work and democratize systems and move to the commercial cloud. Because I believe that when my students are retiring, maybe even before they retire, they'll be working at the exascale. And I say, we're talking about normal people graduating from research programs. So this is a background of me, like my, some of the work we're doing in cyber infrastructure and some of the biology work we're doing. And I wanted to go into really the topic of this workshop or my talk of why cyber infrastructure is important. But before I do that, I've got a lot of is important. But does anybody have any questions about anything?
Alex, this is Damien. I have a quick question.
Yep.
So I think it's safe to assume, your training and background is in biology. You have a PhD in biology, but do you have a PhD in computer science also? How did you set up this infrastructure as a biology faculty, and you basically have a robust infrastructure that's connected not only nationwide, but it seems internationally also. So how did you get to that point?
I guess, hey, Damien, I don't know. It just kind of happened that way. I think part of the main thing is I never have enough resources to do my work. No matter what, I can fill up anything you give me, right? My own stuff. So I'm always an opportunist trying to find new systems to use. And so, like, I came to Clemson, actually, a point about this, because there was an HPC system there, a good campus cluster. It was a top 100 cluster at the time. where I could do my work. And even that wasn't enough. And so I started realizing I need to go in the cloud and started working on, more Kubernetes containerized stuff and just learning that along the way because I'm a geek, really. But using it on systems that allow me to scale up my work. So it's all about scale up and getting access to systems. And along the way, I've been able to build teams of just unbelievable people that help me do things I can't do because I am not a computer scientist. In a lot of ways, I think that helps me because I'm not locked into trying to do it the right way. I'm just trying to get the job done. But I know how to work with computer scientists to help me do it better in the right way as I improve things.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So this is, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Hi, this is Venkata at Lurie from
Hey.
Alabama A&M University again. Nice to see you, Frank. I think we met last time when you came to A&M. So quickly, my question is, since you talked about the costs and when somebody is proposing a, funding, writing a funding proposal. So could you put it in more layman terms, like say, I know that big data is now into what, petabytes and exabytes, but just for each terabyte, how much would it cost, on an average, just to store or, to perform this kind of research?
So this is the best question ever. And the answer is, I've been doing this for like this kind of stuff really for a good 10 years, and I don't know how to answer that question. And that's a big part of what we're doing is this actually is just a graph of these are different GPUs here and different, number of CPUs we're using to run some of our workflows. But we don't know how much resources we need. So we can't even get to the point of costing it in credits. So this is the output of a real-time AI model that Ben Sheely in my lab, who's co-training my lab, he's a computer engineer, has built to be able to monitor our resource usage for this Nextflow workflow manager. What's really important point, I think that this is missed a lot of times, is that we have to run a workflow at data-intensive scales to be able to test it. And we might run it 10 times. We might run it for a week and run out of wall time on our HPC system and have to start it again with more resources. So we are constantly wasting clock cycles. And because there's no way of knowing until we go through the process. So we're trying to watch what we do to really get some confidence intervals to understand the cost of a week. One of my students says, we ran out of wall time, or I ran out of memory because we're using a different, we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
How's that for a no answer to your question?
That's a good answer. It gives a pretty good idea of what's going on and how quickly it is changing, including how quickly the costs are going up, right? So there are a lot of things. Since we are talking about cyber infrastructure, I thought that I should, get a glance at what is involved.
Yeah.
So thanks.
And I think that just going back to this is such an important point, I think, is that a researcher has to have access to a democratized system. And democratized does not mean free. Democratized means that they can access it, right? So I have a campus cluster. I can do a lot of work on that. And maybe I can't scale out, right? I don't know what I'm doing, but I can get work done. But I know I need to scale out to commercial cloud. And I think that the days of campus clusters are numbered, that to just biologists or other faculty other researchers, you're going to need commercial cloud scalability to be able to do that. But the problem is so many people doing a lot of this work don't even know how to use the command line. And so when you start talking about cloud computing and Kubernetes, they don't know what you're talking about at all. Right. Yeah. So trying to be able to teach them on these systems so they can go out and deal with this. But there's a cost layer to it, but there's even more important layers. That's just how to use the darn thing. Right? It's hard to do this stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks.
I may have misunderstood Venkata's original question, but at least for storage that you keep on campus and not in the cloud, good storage, good enough storage can cost you anywhere from $100 to $150 per terabyte acquisition cost to well over $1,000 per terabyte, depending on how many features you want to add to it. Someplace like, I think it's Open Storage Network, they've got a reference build for on the order. I mean, they're basically building a petabyte of storage for $150,000 for massive scale stuff, and it's off the shelf hardware more or less. But.
Yeah. So I can tell you about what we do. So first of all, I never have enough storage, right? So we're always having to just fit to the storage we have. That's one of the biggest bottlenecks, just because the data sets are so huge. But we have $150 per terabyte in our data center at Clemson, which is cheap considering it's all configured and everything. And I bought a couple of JBODs over the years for that, which is like 140 terabytes with that. The big thing that allows us to do our work is we have a giant scratch space, petabytes on this cluster. So even if I'm running stuff on, a Kubernetes system out in the ether somewhere, I down for a while to be able to, when I'm doing data analysis. And we don't use scratch. We're using it for short-term storage, not just workflow storage. But we have to be able to get the work done.
Yeah,
so,
thank you all. Thanks about that cost figure about the memory, but I think the bandwidth and the processing power and the costs involved are also equally important. So thank you all for the answers.
Yep.
Thanks.
It's all equally important. Yeah, and a big thing with the advanced networks that we use, using internet too, which they just turn on the next generation infrastructure. It's really getting turned on now, and they actually got up to 800 gigabit. I think 550 is sort of a stable amount, so it's super fast. But that opens up a lot of doors for me to pull data from repositories, process it, and toss it. I don't have to keep it around because I can always pull it again. So the advanced networks are, becoming more and more important to the way we do our work. Just to throw that out there. So, it's fine. Does anybody have any other questions before I move on? So this is, again, this is biology. There's, I've got molecular biology here. These are test tubes with biological samples in them. This is the way I was trained. I was, trained as a cell biologist, biochemist, but I've had to use, But what's happened now is you have this interface, you have this wet bench work that's now with this dry lab work. This bioinformatics are the tools used to process a lot of this data. What's happening now is you have this sample that a lot of times you go and send the sample off to, we send a lot of our stuff off to China for sequencing. The ASCII text file back with DNA sequences, right? There's A, T, Gs, and Cs in there. And these files can have, hundreds of millions, 20 million records is sort of the minimum for a lot of these things. You have multiple records per sample. But now these things have to be processed on a supercomputer. Workstations can't handle it. And then you don't have storage. There's huge needs. And at the end of the day, a lot of people are trying to get an Excel spreadsheet, analysis of some numbers generated from all this work to find differences, and say gene expression levels or something like that. But this is becoming a fundamental of the system. This DNA sequencer has some pretty sophisticated image analytics built in that I don't have to worry about. Luckily, that's processed for me. But I'm stuck with this as a researcher dealing with these data sets. And so again, cyber infrastructure, this is the NSF Wikipedia definition for it, everything. And this is what I care about. Everything, the data lifecycle, from data in a repository to crunching the numbers to getting some results for a paper. I care about all of this. Any one thing can be a bottleneck, but everything's incredibly important to me. And again, I use bioinformatics, and this is really just using Bash and Python code and whatever to be able to process a lot of these text files typically, and a lot more image analytics are happening now too, for doing genomics work. This is a little bit older, but I thought this was a really interesting foreshadowing of the future. This is an exascale experiment that was done in 2018 at Oak Ridge, at ORNL, and they analyzed millions of genomes. And this is actually the same kind of work that I do and a lot of people that do genetics work do. They just did it at scale. And so I thought this was really cool that exascale biology is already happening. And this is something, again, my students, by the time they retire, is probably going to need to be routine for them to do discovery. So we're not there yet, right? But we've got to get out of the Excel scale of things and laptop to exascale computing. And, maybe this is aspirational for the next decade, but trying to get as close as we can. But It's not aspirational if you've got a nice computer, but like they did at Oak Ridge. The guy who did this experiment actually was a wine. He studied grapes, and was really good at a lot of this work, and moved to Oak Ridge, and now he's doing exascale computing after doing grape genomics for the wine industry. A lot of what's happening is the cost is dropping. I'm sorry, this is why do we need research computing? This is reason C. These disruptive technologies, DNA sequencing used to cost, that's $100 million, 2001. 23andMe's, I think they've had $50 sales for your genome sequenced, on Black Friday, right? So it's becoming very, very cheap to get genomes. And this is going to continue. I think that there's another level of this going down, and where the resolution gets higher. This cost is dropping, and to the point where there's tech out there where we probably could start putting DNA sequencers as surveillance, for pandemics and things like that. This is a recent movement of data across the internet too. These are petabytes per day, right? And this red line, I believe, is 2020 usage here. I think there's a more recent one, actually. I don't have it on here, but this is just showing you there's a lot of data being moved around, right? And this is not just DNA sequence data. There's lots of stuff that's going across the national backbone. And so this is a map of the RENs, the regional RENs, right? Like SOX, for example, is an example of this. And C-Light is in South Carolina. And these are participants in the C-Light network. This is the backbone of Internet 2. And so we're moving data across all of these networks. And we have with Cisco, a Cisco container platform box at C-Light. And I can see where like having RENs is just proposing an idea. RENs adding compute to their services, and being able to add cloud computing and distributed and scaling it. And I think that this could be funded by partners, people who are already connected to these networks. I think is a really important thing, and trying to build out a big thing I'm trying to do. Probably read too much sci-fi as a kid, but trying to help build a planetary supercomputer, right? This democratized that high school students can access. So like at Clemson, we have the Palmetto cluster, campus cluster. Anybody with a Clemson ID can access it. It's democratized. I think every citizen in the world should be able to access these kind of things, so they can figure out these grand challenges that we're all facing and get jobs. A lot of science you can do now, you can pull data sets, right? So this is a map. This actually is a little bit dated. This is one from January. I think we're at 53 petabytes now of data in one database at NCBI. There's over 8 million experiments now that you can mine, find new combinations of things and make discovery. So you can do a lot of really good science, straight up hypothesis testing science, using a lot of this in silico data. So we can't do this without research computing. Also with research computing, if you don't have a campus cluster, and I think of my daughter is at Vassar, and that's a great school, but they don't have a lot of compute. They need to be able to access the planetary network, or democratized cyber infrastructure. Alabama A&M needs more access. Clemson needs more. Everybody needs more access, right? And a lot of the compute cyber infrastructure is concentrated in R1 schools, which is great. Great stuff's being done there, but we need to get this down to where everybody can do it, can use it. And these are some of the systems we use. And so this is actually, kind of answering Damien's question, that these are all systems that I've been using over the years, just trying to get my job done, get my work done. And there's lots of these are different systems again that you can access, and we use a lot of this. I really love the Pacific Research Platform that's sort of sourced out of the West Coast, and San Diego State and Berkeley are big drivers of this, and the Open Science Grid as well. That's all over the place, being able to get a lot of work done. But we are focused. A lot of my personal research and growth is focused on Kubernetes systems, so that I can move to the cloud. This another reason for research computing is there's unbelievable stuff that can be done with this, right? I mean, like Uber and Lyft, I guess, exist because of commercial clouds, right? They didn't have. So innovation for the U.S. and other economies, I think, is critical for having research computing, so people can learn how to use this unbelievable things. this is something I see, happening, in the near future, is collaborations with things like, commercial cloud provider, regional, national networks, the pharmacy, a genome provider, linking these things up together, finding targets. Are you going to respond to this drug appropriately? Your doctor just prescribed for you, and helping the doctor decide what dose to give you. Or maybe even in the future, you have a condition and your DNA, and at CVS they actually decide to give you, a different dosage based upon your genetic background, right? That's approved by the doctor and stuff like that. So this kind of innovation stuff, I think is definitely, there's pieces of it happening. I see it all over the place. We need workforce development. We need research computing for this. This is a big driver for my company Praxis. I'm trying to not just teach people about, hey, DNA is cool and transcription is important and all that kind of stuff, but like how you turn that into things that the biotech industry needs. So trying to do workforce development. This is a job description from a student from a company called DNA Nexus, and a student of mine just took the internship. He accepted it. But this is the kind of stuff that they're looking for. They want people that know machine learning. They want large-scale computing on cloud computing platforms. They want you to know this kind of stuff, right? Computer science, bioinformatics. You need to know how to program. These are the jobs that the demand is very high for, and I'm seeing my students get these jobs, which makes me happy because I'm doing my job right. If people are hiring my students, right? But workforce development is key, and you can't do it without research computing. So these are the reasons I just went through, of why research computing is important from a biology perspective. And again, this is all supported by the IT organization, right? I'm a big fan of the IT because it's integrated to my work, and it's fun too, just being a geek. I love all this stuff. But to do a lot of science, you need big compute, and the IT organization has to get you access to it, or build it, right? If we can get this stuff democratized, and the IT organization can do this, and democratized too, I think, with a lot of sharing between institutions, then that bored kid in 11th grade in some high school somewhere in the U.S. can be, he can still be getting in trouble, but he could be in the back of the room on his iPad doing cancer genomics, right? If he has access to these systems. So maybe he fails out of high school, but he cures cancer. And this is the kind of thing that I want to try to enable. Just a few other things too, like so another thing that's really important, like I think the days of campus clusters are numbered, and only big schools can keep the kind of money pumping into them to scale them like you need. So I just think the only outlet is the cloud, and so I think that every IT organization needs to have access to it and democratize systems, and I don't think it needs to just be Wisconsin Madison. It can be smaller schools, even down to the high school level, right? And there's my high school district or county district my son goes to in South Carolina, like they have access to internet too now. And I'm trying to get to a point where I can do some training with them and get them to do it. So I think you can have, community college students, high school students, and the food chain above accessing these compute systems without a campus cluster. This is critical for scientific discovery, workforce development, entrepreneurship, revenue generation. When you get grants, the indirect dollars go back to the university, and that can be a huge indirect dollars for small universities, right? If you go and get a cloud grant doing massive compute, that can actually bring some money back to the university. But also faculty and student recruitment. I'm on a lot of search committees, and if you don't have this infrastructure, a lot of people are not going to go take jobs or go to your school. I don't think schools can survive without advanced cyber infrastructure, simply because people aren't going to get the training they need to get jobs and discover stuff. Then I'll leave this up here. Actually, I'll come back to it. Well, I'll leave it up. These are just some things that I've noticed, from my issues as to do biology work, problems that I have, bottlenecks for this, and we can talk about these. Just real quick, these are since this is recorded, the people that have done the work. My lab over here, these are people that graduated recently, and a lot of my recent or active collaborations, lots of different places here. And my funding, we get a lot of funding from the National Science Foundation, NSF rules. Cisco's given us money, Clemson, and I've got money from DOE and USDA to do some of this work. But I will leave the slide up and answer any questions.
So Alex, you talked about the need for compute at pushing it down from some of the R1 universities. And then at the same time, you also said in 3 years or at some interval, we might all be doing this in the cloud. How do you see all that working out?
Well, the thing about the cloud is it costs a lot of money, right? But anybody could theoretically access it if they have the grant funding. So I think smaller institutions, I think you'll see more smaller institutions getting significant funding if they know how to spend it properly, and that's a hard thing to do for their researchers. And I know, so I think smaller institutions can have the power of the R1 campus cluster institutions, if they have access to it. But the cost is, you can't just, oh, let's turn on the cloud. One experiment, I saw one experiment, a demo, one data set that was human data set cost $36,000 to demo it. And so we can't just go to the cloud yet, but Pacific Research Platform, Open Science Grid, things like that are a great way to be doing work before you go and spend money in the cloud. Learn how to do it.
Okay, great. That's a good tip. Thank you.
Alex, thank you for the talk. You mentioned that sometimes biologists don't have the knowledge to do command line, etc. But on the other hand, there might be tools that they know that can be incorporated by IT professionals. You said graph theory, for example, could be useful for IT. So what are some tools or background that could be useful for IT, in particular for grad students, for example?
For IT to be able to help the researcher, or what do you mean?
Help the research and even do research on IT.
I'm trying to think. So, I think of it from a biology perspective. So there is, there's a class of people called facilitators, research computing facilitators, that can help onboard people to do research computing, whatever that takes, right? Not just the system that you have. So teaching them how to teach the researcher, like how do you teach Python? How do you teach command line? How do you teach workflow managers, things like that? How do you teach, AI, TensorFlow? Like teaching the IT trainers how to teach back to the researchers, I think is critical. But I'm not, this is definitely opinion land, but I'm not a big fan of turnkey solutions because they don't work. There's always exceptions. I'm a big fan of teaching people how to fish by teaching them how to do Python and use the command line. And so I'm not trying to build anything super easy. I'm trying to get it to where it's easy to get to the command line and the Jupyter notebooks, they can do stuff.
Thanks.
Yep.
And I have another question. In one of the slides I saw GPUs, CPUs, you use those for your research. There are these programmable switches right now with P4. Did you consider using, for example, programmable switches for some offloading some processes to the programmable switches? Do you see something, some application that can be implemented?
Definitely, yeah. We've had some, embryonic projects on that side, but there's so many things we're doing that I haven't been able to focus on that. But typically, if we have access to a new system, then we try to adapt our workflows to it. I just haven't had anybody work on that. Even my big collaborator, that's what she does, is that kind of work. But we just been, I guess, really just focused on GPUs and CPUs for doing work. But I was trying to get into some of the quantum computing for some of the sequence alignment stuff we do, but a lot of that code base is not ready yet for people.
Hi, this is Hamid. I got a few questions here. So you talk about the cyber infrastructure, how things gonna be in the next future, um, and how things are coming up from the biological area. Do you think IT needs to evolve to meet this demand from the biological area? What I mean is that right now, everything is going on IP. You got TCP/IP and stuff like that. For these cyber infrastructure to be fully available, to be more pervasive, does IT need to do we need to evolve a little bit or no?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question, complicated question, and I think I'm going to answer it. Excuse me, but I think what you really need is you need a layer between the researcher and the IT, and a lot of that's this facilitator layer, and it's somebody that can deal with the researcher's bad habits and understand what they're trying to do. And sometimes they don't know they need to scale up, or they don't know they need to use a class example as a DTN, and they're SCPing through their wireless in their office, and downloading to their laptop and then through wireless uploading to the cluster, like stuff like that. So having a facilitator group of people, a layer that understands how to translate and understands what the needs of the researcher is absolutely critical. And that doesn't have to be an army of people. It could be one or two people, but you need to be engaging the researcher, and I really think you have to suck it up and understand that the researcher's not going to do it right. They're going to do it inefficient and have bad habits. But the beauty of it is if you get them to onboard and use these systems where they're self-sustaining, or they can just ask for help, then they might be curing cancer. You know what I mean? But they're not going to do it right, in my opinion. I put myself in that category. I'm going to have bad habits.
Thank you. And then last question from my end. You mentioned I2.
Yep.
What about institutions that are not currently on I2? Would that put them into a disadvantaged position?
If the thing with, and again, I'm on the IT board, so like full disclosure with that, but I think that if you don't need to move a lot of data from your campus, then you don't have to have I2 yet. You probably will be doing, there's going to be 5G data collection stuff, and people are collecting data out in the middle of nowhere in rural areas, right? You're going to need that connectivity. If you're doing compute, I think that you're not at a disadvantage if you're pulling your data from other places into your compute through a terminal access where you have some stable connection to like national compute grids. So that's from like this planetary supercomputer, the Pacific Research Platform, Open Science Grid, the commercial cloud, right, which is more expensive. Just making sure you have terminal access into that, you can get the work done. But if you have an immediate need for movement of data, you need internet to connectivity, or connectivity through a regional provider. Nobody needs it yet. Most people don't need internet 2 yet, I think, but I think that they will in the next 5 years. Smaller schools, big schools need it already. So I guess I'm going overcast. Do you want me to stop?
Yeah, I think it's probably time. So thank you very much, Alex. Great presentation. I think it got us kicked off in just the right way. Really appreciate your time and effort here. Thank you very much. Next up, we have Henry Neiman, whose name I butchered on the original slide, but I'm getting an updated version out to everybody. And his topic is talking about working with researchers. Thank you very much, Henry.
Yeah, and can you all see my slides? And I'm going to do a quick test. Can you see me advancing my slides?
Yes, it all looks great.
Oh, I'm so happy. I was on Google Meet yesterday, and the whole time I was talking, they only could see my title slide. It was very disheartening. So I'm going to try and do a better job with this one than yesterday. Also, I want to thank Alex because he did a beautiful lead-in to my talk when he brought up the issue of research computing facilitators, because this talk actually is sort of the opening salvo in teaching people how to be research computing facilitators but it's also a way to get researchers and other research computing and cyber infrastructure and IT professionals thinking about research computing and researchers. And I'm going to do a quick commercial here for two things that we have available. One is we're doing a workshop on how to be a research computing facilitator. That's coming up the first full week of June, the week after Memorial Day, not the week of Memorial Day. So if you enjoy this talk, imagine a whole week of the same level of delight. If you want to participate in that, send me an email. I'll point you to the registration page. We also, Alex talked about the difficulty with having very large data sets and having places to put them. And Alex is one of our early adopters on the OU and Regional Research Store, which is a large-scale tape archive. It is large scale, it's long term, so your data will live there for at least 8 years, and it's shockingly cheap. You pay a one-time purchase price on tape cartridges that it essentially boils down to $6.50 per usable terabyte per copy. So for that, also send me an email. My email address is at the bottom of the slide. Okay, so this is a quick outline. And the way I'm going to do this talk, number one, please constantly interrupt me with questions and comments. But if you're going to put something in the chat, somebody else needs to yell it out loud for me, because in presenter mode, I can't see your chat. So if you do put it in the chat, if someone who's running the workshop can read it out loud for us, that would help. Or I encourage everybody to dive in and ask your questions or make your comments by voice, and we'll have a lovely time together. All right, so let's talk about research terminology. So who on the call today, and I know there's more than 100 of you, so surely someone on the call today believes that oxygen is a metal. So if you're someone who believes that oxygen is a metal, go ahead and answer by voice and say, I believe that oxygen is a metal. I'll wait patiently. I have 40 minutes. Henry. Oh, did someone say it?
I've heard this, or I've heard this part of the talk. I was at the residency in 2019.
Yeah, you're a ringer, so you're cheating. Anybody who actually believes it without having seen the talk before? No takers? Okay. What if I told you there are scientists who believe that oxygen is a metal? Would you believe me if I told you that? Well, let's think about what oxygen is. So in real life, we know sort of from a chemistry perspective, you know, it's atomic number 8. And I don't know what I don't know what a chalcogen is. That's a chemistry word. The last time I took chemistry was high school. I know that if you don't have it, you die. And so do fire and rust. And you can't have water without oxygen and so on. Right? These are sort of the basic stuff that we understand about oxygen. But now let's talk about oxygen in the context of astronomy. So to answer what do astronomers believe about oxygen, let me ask the question differently. What are the ingredients of the universe? And by the way, I'm skipping dark matter because we don't know what that is. But of the stuff we know what it is, of the visible matter in the universe, what is the universe made of? Well, the answer is 75% of the visible matter in the universe is hydrogen, atomic number 1, and 24%, the rest of the universe, is helium, atomic number 2. So everything else combined, everything that isn't hydrogen or helium, everything else combined is about 1% of the visible matter in the universe. Again, I'm skipping over dark matter, but 99% of the visible matter in the universe is hydrogen and helium. So if I'm an astronomer, what elements matter to me? Now's your opportunity to dive in and answer a question. And by the way, it's on the slide, so you won't have to do a lot of thinking, but you can seem like a genius by answering.
Hydrogen and helium.
Absolutely correct. You are a genius. Good. All right. Now, On the other hand, we know that the universe has planets in it. So what's the planet made of? Well, like the Earth is almost all iron, a bit of nickel, and then a little bit of other things that are not iron and nickel. Now, what do we know iron and nickel are? What would be the general category of substances that we would include things like iron and nickel in?
Metals.
Metals. So if we were to have a general term for things that are not hydrogen or helium, that general term might be metals, things like iron and nickel. And by the way, as normal human beings, we have a sense of what something is, what it means to be a metal, right? Other than mercury, which is liquid at room temperature, it's hard and solid at room temperature, and it's shiny, right? That's a pretty good working definition of metal. Now, that's not the chemistry definition. Here's a picture of that. All the yellow bits in this diagram are metals. All the green bits are not, and then the orange bits are semi-metals. I don't know anything about what that is. And you can see I've marked hydrogen, helium, and oxygen in this diagram. Here's hydrogen, here's helium, here's oxygen, and they're all green, so they're not metals. I stole this off the web. It's a lovely diagram. So in real life, we instinctively know oxygen, of course, is not a metal. But if you're an astronomer, especially my advisor for my PhD was a cosmologist, they studied the entire universe over its entire lifetime. To them, the word metals means things in that 1%, things that are not hydrogen or helium. So if that's their catch-all definition of metal, metals essentially means other, then yeah, oxygen to them is a metal. And when I was in grad school, when I'd go to our research group meetings, it took me, I'm not making this up, it took me 3 years to figure out that when they used the word metals, they didn't mean hard, shiny things. They meant not hydrogen or helium. So what you mean by a word depends on what's important in the research area that you study. Okay, so let's take that thought a bit farther. So suppose I capture a mathematician, a psychologist, and a movie producer, and I let them loose in a room with a table and some chairs, and I say, now talk about projection. What's projection to a psychologist? Well, to a psychologist, projection means taking the things that you are feeling or believe and assuming that someone else is feeling or believes those things. To a mathematician, projection means taking something in a higher order space and reducing it so that it fits into a lower order space. So for example, taking a 3D cube and drawing those two squares with the diagonal lines to get a 2D picture of that 3D cube on a 2D sheet of paper, right? Or for a movie producer, of course, a projection is you shine light through a piece of celluloid, through a piece of translucent plastic to put an image on the screen, which, by the way, relates pretty closely to the math definition, which is take a 3D thing and turn it into a 2D image, right? That's one example of projection. Okay, here's another example. What's a fluid? Now, you know, when you were a kid and you didn't want to go to class that day because you had an exam you didn't study for, not that any of us ever did that, of course, but, you know, you'd say, I'm sick, and your parent or guardian would tuck you into bed and feed you chicken soup and tell you to drink plenty of fluids, right? And that actually helped. And if we think more colloquially, the definition of fluid is the same as the definition of liquid, or close enough, right? But in physical sciences and engineering, that's not what the word fluid means. The word fluid effectively means not a solid. And in fact, in computational fluid dynamics, the most popular fluid that they ever study is the Earth's atmosphere. for example, the fluid dynamics of air flowing over the wing of an aircraft, right? So to a scientist, particularly physical sciences and engineering, fluid is something that can change its shape, but can't change its volume, change its shape. And then a liquid is an incompressible fluid. It can't change its volume. Okay. Now let's think about scale. And again, we're trying to get inside the head of scientists in various research disciplines and subdisciplines and sub-subdisciplines. So if I study some phenomenon that occurs at quantum scale over femtoseconds, so nanoseconds, picoseconds, femtoseconds, maybe I got those two switched in order, and then attoseconds at the end. So itty bitty tiny. So I can't remember if that's quadrillionths or quintillions of a second. At that scale, how much does gravity affect what's going on in that scientific phenomenon? On the other hand, if I'm a cosmologist, I study the entire universe over its entire lifetime, how important is gravity there? And so how much do I have to worry about gravity depending on what kind of research I do? This is a good question. Alex, if you're still on the call, how much in your biological studies do you worry about gravity?
He had to drop, Henry. I'm sorry about that.
Okay. If anybody else is on who's a biologist, feel free to jump in and tell us how much gravity matters in your, for example, bioinformatics studies. I'm willing to bet I know the answer. Right? Okay, here's another good one. What's the difference between science and engineering? What does science focus on? What does engineering focus on? Well, science typically focuses on discovery. How are things? Engineering focuses on design. How can we make things? Which raises an interesting question that came up, it's probably more than a decade ago now. A colleague and I had a grad student from our electrical engineering department, and my colleague was a meteorologist. I'm a computer scientist. The student was an electrical engineer, and his project, his master's thesis, was taking software that someone else had written and building other software on top of it. And when we got to his thesis defense, one of the other meteorologists on his thesis committee said, okay, my first question is, how on earth is this research? And we had to patiently explain to him that all of his science research was about discovery, but this electrical engineering student's research was about design. So is a design project research? Well, the engineers will certainly say so. Do engineers do science research? Well, some of them do discovery. What does it mean to do research about software? Do computer science faculty do research? Which leads into my next topic, right? What's the difference between computer science and IT? And what happens if you, who are not in computer science and not in IT, refer to your computer science faculty colleagues as IT? How will they react? Having seen this happen, as a computer science faculty myself, I have not made this error of judgment, but having watched someone else make this error of judgment, I can tell you it goes over very poorly. Computer science faculty despise when that happens because they consider IT to be plumbing. They don't consider it to be a research discipline. And again, rolling back to this question, do computer scientists do research? Well, computer scientists sure think so. And they certainly do not agree with the thought that their role in a research project is to help the researchers in the domain STEM disciplines, or what have you, to do real research, while the computer scientists are just there to help get the code running. You will find they object very strongly. I'm sure some of you have already encountered this. and some of you are CS faculty, and I'm sure have had these feelings. They object very strongly. Here's another good one. I had a colleague in chemical engineering one time, and he was off to a conference and was going to present some research that I had helped with. And I referred to what he was going to present as data, and he stopped me dead in the middle of the conversation. He said, no, 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 no. I cannot refer to this stuff as data because this stuff was the output of a simulation. And if I call it data in a chemical engineering conference, I will be laughed out of the chemical engineering discipline. I can only refer to this as simulated data in front of my colleagues. Okay, now I'm going to switch gears because I want to address a question that came up at the tail end of Alex's talk, which was the question about what's the relationship between research computing and IT, and I'm going to use a more specific term, enterprise IT. Are they natural enemies or are they natural allies? Or perhaps unnatural allies? By the way, when I get real close to running out of time, just yell and scream and tell me to shut up. I believe I have about 23 more minutes. I'm going to try and make good use of the time. And when I run out of time, I'll just stop. All right. So a key quality of enterprise IT and the way you stay in the enterprise IT business is what we in the trade refer to as 5 nines. That means 99.999% uptime. That translates to 5 minutes and 15 seconds of downtime per year. So effectively 0 downtime. To achieve that, everything needs to be secure. You need to use established technology. You need to follow best practices. You need an enormous amount of redundancy. You need failover, and on and on and on. Okay. And by the way, all of that is terribly expensive. In the research computing world, it's actually the exact upside down of that. And I'm not making this up. It's 1.5 nines. It's 95% uptime, and that translates to 18.25 24-hour days per year. So 1.5, 36 hours of downtime per month. It's the complete upside down of enterprise IT. And I'm not making this up, by the way. This is the NSF. This is the National Science Foundation standard, published repeatedly. I'm quoting from a 2017 $60 million solicitation, which I believe included another roughly $40 million in operating funds, so roughly a $100 million project. They said, these production resources should be unavailable as a result of scheduled and unscheduled maintenance no more than 5% of the time. Whenever I read this quote to enterprise IT people, I can see their teeth grinding. I can see all the blood draining out of their faces. I can almost feel with them the chills running up and down their spine. This makes them cringe, and it makes them believe that research computing people are insane. Okay, so what do you need in order to do research computing effectively? You need to be fast and flexible. You got to be able to turn on a dime because new requirements arise every day, or at least every week. We're constantly adjusting to completely new ways of doing research computing that we could not possibly have predicted we would need to support. But we need to support them. As soon as we hear about them, we got to start solving them. We got to use cutting edge technology. So Intel literally 2 days ago announced their new Ice Lake CPUs. You can't buy them yet, but you're going to start to be able to buy them real soon. Now, by the way, special customers have been able to buy them for a few months, but normal people can't yet buy them. And only, I think about a month ago, AMD released their Milan family of CPUs. And we are expected by our researchers to provide those, not to provide the older stuff. And in a lot of cases, the kind of work we do, there's no such thing as best practices. Nobody knows how to do it. You know, it's the standard joke about research. If we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be research. So we're not kidding about, sorry, I got interrupted for a second. We're not kidding about all of this stuff. And to prove I'm not kidding, on the enterprise IT side, about 5 years ago, 2016, Delta had a failure in their main data center. It lasted about 5 hours. It cost them, they published this, but this is not, I'm making this up. It cost them $150 million for a 5-hour outage. That's $1 million for every 2 minutes of downtime. Now, you know, if my university or your university goes down for 5 hours, it's not going to cost $150 million, but it's going to be kind of proportional. There's going to be a significant cost. So if you think about, you know, if it's payday tomorrow and the payroll system goes down tonight, heads will roll, or at least assistant heads, right? So if you're in the enterprise IT business, you're going to make sure that everything is always up and nothing is ever down, because the alternative is you're going to be selling pencils out of a tin cup. On the other hand, on the research computing side, if you're not cutting edge, you're not going to be out of business tomorrow, but you're going to make yourself less and less useful, and eventually you're going to get yourself laid off. So you've got to be cutting edge. And in both cases, the enterprise side, the research side, you're looking at trade-offs, and those are cost versus capability trade-offs. And you've got to make those trade-offs correctly. On the enterprise IT side, the trade-off is in favor of reliability, uptime, as many nines as you can get. By the way, at OU, we don't achieve 5 nines, we get 4.5, 99.995% uptime. That's about half an hour of downtime per year. On the research computing side, we do better than the NSF. We do 99%, but we're not aspiring to do 99.9. That would be a waste of money. And to prove about the money thing, I actually did this calculation. I was working on a proposal with a meteorology faculty member a couple of years ago, so I have some numbers. And I came up with meteorology grad students are about the best paid at OU, or comparable to the best paid, pretty close. It's about $60K a year fully loaded with tuition support and benefits and indirect costs. And the thing is, at an academic research computing organization, the bulk of the users are students, right? Faculty bring in grant money, help the students write the papers, make sure the students graduate, that sort of thing. But they don't get to do a lot of the research tasks themselves, except when they go on sabbatical, which is why they love going on sabbatical, actually get their hands dirty for a change. Mostly they do research management. It's the grad students who are doing the bulk of the actual research tasks. At any given moment on a typical academic supercomputer, you've got 100 users, so roughly 100 grad students, from 10 to 100. And that's going to be from 5 to 50 different research groups. Well, if the machine goes down for a full 24-hour day, what's the lost productivity? It's about $16,000. You can sort of multiply and divide and get that. But then that translates to between 3 and very low 4 figures of lost productivity per research group. Now, would the faculty rather that there was no downtime? Of course they would. They absolutely would prefer that. But the problem is that comes with a big price. The price that comes with is going from 1.5 nines to 5 nines is immensely expensive. I used to think it was a factor of 2 difference in price per unit of computing capacity. And then I was having a conversation with one of the vendors, and they laughed at me and cruelly mocked me. And they said, it's not a factor of 2. They didn't say you idiot, but you could hear it in tone. It's a factor of 10. So the deal is, it will cost 10 times as much to do 5 nines for the same amount of research computing capacity and therefore research computing productivity. Would my budget go up by a factor of 10? Well, as it turns out, I asked the head of our business office in OUIT, and his answer was exactly as predicted. My budget would go up by $0. So I said to one of our physics faculty, Pat, if I could give you 5 nines, no downtime, and all you had to give up was 90% of your research productivity, would you take that deal? And his answer was, of course not in a million years. So when I put it that way, faculty get on board with they'd rather have a day of downtime every month than have than to lose 90% of their research productivity. It's a very easy choice for them. So let's have the biggest machine we can afford at the cheapest price per unit in exchange for a lot more lost time, a lot more downtime than the enterprise folks have. And to prove I'm not lying about this, I actually did an inventory of all the job failures in calendar 2020 versus job successes. We found out that 4.5% of jobs failed. Of those, only a tiny fraction, 0.08% of all jobs failed because of a hardware failure, which is what most of that money goes into. And that's totally not paying a huge amount of money to fix. And in fact, even the 4.5%, most of which is due to users not being able to predict how the run is going to play out, which is not their fault. That's just the way it goes. Those failures are inevitable. They're normal. And you just bake that into your operating procedures. So what are the implications for an IT organization and a research computing organization, which sometimes are part of the same group, sometimes are in separate units? Well, research computing is less expensive per unit of computing, per unit of storage than enterprise IT, but of course it's also less resilient. So when a researcher comes to us, this actually came up in December, we had a group that asked this exact question. They said, so can we move all our stuff to your internal research cloud? And my question was, can you afford 8 hours of downtime per month? If this service can afford 8 hours of downtime per month, we're the right answer for you because we'll save you a fortune over enterprise IT, who, by the way, are our sister teams within OUIT. We're part of OUIT. But if you can't tolerate that much downtime, go to them and use their internal cloud. Don't come to us because we guarantee we're going to screw you over if you can't tolerate that level of downtime. And it was great. So they said, well, this service over here will go to enterprise and this stuff over here will go to research. They knew exactly which way things needed to go. So the other way to think about it, and this is why research computing and enterprise IT are actually at least allies. I'm not sure if natural, but at least allies. Research computing is very experimental by its nature, very limited best practices, but the technologies that we adopt now are going to become enterprise technologies in 3 to 10 years, depending on the specific technology. Like we're seeing much more uptake of what we used to call software-defined networking among our enterprise IT colleagues than we did 10 years ago. But a really concrete example here, what we saw was we were the first ones to move into our data center when it was first built because we don't interoperate with most of the enterprise IT stuff. So it's pretty straightforward to pick up all our machines from one side of campus, drive 5 miles down the road and pop it into a new data center and play test that new data center to see was the network working, was the power system working, was the cooling system working, was everything hunky-dory. And once we were in there, and then our enterprise colleagues saw that we were successful, then they could start moving stuff in there because they could see that there weren't any major showstoppers in the data center. So have research computing be the guinea pig because we can afford to make mistakes, we can afford to have downtime, and then use what's learned from the research computing experiences to create best practices for enterprise IT. Now let's talk about the mindset gap. In the olden days, in the long, long ago, in the before time, and here I mean 10, maybe 15 years ago, it used to be the case that our typical new supercomputer user came to us from a Windows laptop background, occasionally Mac OS, but mostly Windows. So they knew about keyboards, right? They might even have done some MS-DOS commands back in the olden days. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But those were the golden years. Those were our salad days, right? We look fondly and nostalgically upon those days. Those days are over, long since. Nowadays, a typical new user comes to us from an iOS or Android background. And that has changed our job immensely. And by us, I mean research computing professionals. So think about, for example, how you install an app, how you install software on a phone or a tablet. It's super simple. It's 3 taps, right? You tap once to open the store, once to select the app, and once to give the app permission to listen to your phone call, right? Real simple. And then from then on, it'll auto-update itself when new versions become available. Your labor cost, your grand total labor cost is 3 taps, right? It's super easy. On a large-scale system, on a supercomputer or anything like that, well, if you're lucky, then it's easy build. More likely, it's configure and make, and each one of them has a bunch of weird, quirky things that only that code uses, and you've got dependencies, and it just, I mean, we've had codes that took over a month to build because they were so wretchedly packaged that it was a nightmare, and only professionals could do it. We would never impose it on one of our actual researchers. How about storage? If I need to double the storage in my phone, I got 2 options. If it doesn't have that little slot in the side, I got to buy a new phone. If it has the little slot, I can go over to Best Buy or Walmart or wherever, and I can buy the little tiny card for like $50 or whatever, and pop it in that slot, and the phone immediately recognizes it and can immediately start putting files on it. No problem, right? So it costs 2 figures and takes 2 minutes max. For us, okay, we got to do a general sense of what we need. We got to write an RFP, which is a nightmare. In our case, it typically takes several months just to write the thing. Then we got to do the RFP. That takes months, or at least a month. Then we got to do a bid evaluation. That can take 1 or more months. Configure, purchase, deploy. We've got maintenance all the way down to decommissioning. The whole thing is a nightmare, right? And once we get to deployment, from getting approval to do it to deployment is anywhere from 3 months to 2 years. It's a nightmare. What does storage cost? As I said, on a handheld, you're looking at 2 figures, maybe low 3 figures at the outside. On a laptop, you're looking at 3 figures typically. Large scale, a petabyte of tape is 6,000. A petabyte of spinning disk is about 60,000. A petabyte of SSD is about 4 times that. Okay, now I'm running out of time. I got a few minutes. I'm going to try and hit this real quick. Why are researchers the way they are? Well, let's sort of break it down, but the answer will turn out to be the same every time. What is it that faculty at research-intensive institutions are rewarded for? At teaching-intensive institutions, one of these becomes much less important, one becomes somewhat less important, and one becomes more important. At research-intensive institutions, faculty are rewarded for 3 things: bringing in grant money, publishing papers, and graduating students. I'm not claiming a specific order to those, but faculty are definitely not rewarded for having good computing. As such, they are implicitly punished for having good computing, because if they spend money on good computing, that's money they didn't spend on bringing in grant money, publishing papers, and graduating students, and so they'll get less reward. So that's an implicit punishment. They want to spend as little as possible on anything that isn't those 3 things. Now, I know our argument is, well, having good IT will help you do those other things. But that's hard to see when you could turn that hardware money into a 5th graduate student who will publish a bunch of papers. All right, so let's talk about tenure track faculty. So if I'm tenure track, if I don't have tenure yet, I got to publish a lot of papers, bring a lot of grant money, graduate a lot of students, or I'm going to get fired, right? I'm gone. I got to get stuff to work now. It's got to work reliably because I have a very short timeline. I have 7 years, right? That's pretty typical for tenure track. But it's actually not 7 years, because the 7th year is, if you didn't get tenure, you have 1 year to get a job somewhere else, and then they kick you out. So it's really 6 years, except the 6th year is when they decide whether you get tenure, which means you have to get your package in by the end of the 5th year, more or less. So you really have 5 years. But even that's not quite true, because it typically takes about half a year to get a journal article published. So really, from the time you get to that tenure track position to the time you're done with what you're going to be judged on for whether you have a job for the rest of your life is 4.5 years. Your patience is 0. Everything's got to work right now, forever. Now, what if you're tenured? You've already got tenure. Well, if I don't publish papers, bring in grant money, and graduate students, and by the way, the bar is going up because the expectation is higher now that I'm an associate professor or a full professor. I'm not going to get the raise. I'm not going to get the named chair. I'm not going to be elected into one of the relevant national academy or whatever it may be. I'm not going to get any of those further career advancements. So it's the same thing. I need it to work now. I need it to work forever. If I'm research faculty, so I'm not on tenure track, well, that means if I don't bring in the grant money, I'm automatically laid off, right? There's no money internally to pay for me. So I got to keep going. And I don't want to live on soft money forever, so I want to turn this into a hard money position. Same thing for postdocs, ultimately the same for everybody. Now, if I'm writing grant proposals, what's my chance of success? Well, the NSF publishes all this data in a place that I know where to find it, and now so do you. 28.5% last fiscal year of proposals to the NSF actually got funded. By the way, not necessarily at the level that was requested, but funded at all. In EPSCoR jurisdictions like Alabama and South Carolina, 26.5%. For non-EPSCoR like Tennessee and Georgia, 28.9%. You can look up your percentages here, but between a quarter and a third, depending on where you're from, is what you expect. So funding is the law of large numbers. I have to submit 3 to 4 proposals just to get one funded, which means I got to be constantly submitting proposals. How much time do I have to screw around with the computing folks? Not much. So for example, at OU, our strategy is we don't ask faculty to write a grant proposal to get time on our supercomputer because they've got limited time to write grant proposals. We'd much rather they spend that time writing proposals to get external funding to come into the university than to get permission to use a machine that's already been paid for. I'm going to stop there. I got time for 1 or 2 questions. I'm going to turn off my share screen here so I can figure out how to do that. There. Okay. Questions? If someone wants to go ahead, just dive right in. And you can do it I can see the chat now, so you can do it in the chat or by voice.
Henry, who are some of the folks that we could reach out to as IT professionals to get in touch with researchers that might have need IT resources for their research?
Right, and I'm so glad you asked that question because I have a bunch of slides later in this slide deck on exactly that issue. So I will give you 2 answers. One, go look up those slides. So well, you can't see it here, but slide number 44 is a title slide that says how to find researchers. So go read that and then sign up for our virtual residency workshop, June 7th to 11th. And we'll dig even deeper and you'll learn amazing things.
Great, thank you.
More questions? I love questions. Okay, then let's wrap it up and thank you, everybody. And my usual joke, if you had half as much fun as me, then I had twice as much fun as you.
Thank you very much, Henry.
Thank you all.
We really appreciated you participating with us here today. Thank you. Great information. Yep. So next up is DTNs and moving data. Is that you, Ken, or George Rob?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, apologies. Go ahead.
I think I'll be starting for a few slides on data mobility, and then George will take over with DTNs. So.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. Is that coming up okay?
Looks great. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, I'm Ken Miller. I work with